left-hand side for Vieira. He'll play it through to Gabriel Jesus, who's in here for Arsenal. Gabriel Jesus to finish it off. Oh, what a way to do it! Gabriel Jesus seals the points for Arsenal. He's back, and he's back with a bang.
Into the penalty area it goes. Gabriel's header, and it's into the back of the net. Arsenal take an early lead through Gabriel.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the daily Arsenal podcast with me, Harry Symeou.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Happy Saturday and welcome back to another live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. As always, we've got a fair bit to get into. We're going to be talking Emile Smith Rowe's goodbye. Of course, it was confirmed yesterday that he has joined Fulham Football Club on a permanent transfer. We'll discuss the details of that deal too. We're also going to have a look at what's going on with Eddie Nketiah. This feels like an sort of running theme on the show. We've been talking a lot about Eddie Nketiah over the last few days. We've had an update from Fabrizio Romano about half an hour ago on what exactly is going on with this. So we'll discuss that and we'll talk about the links that have resurfaced to Victor Osimhen. How reliable is the source? Is there anything in this? We're going to talk about that on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner. So make sure you stay tuned throughout. A big hello to everybody that is joining us live, whether that be on YouTube, on X, or any other platform for that matter. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate you guys being here. If you're watching us on YouTube, please do leave us a like and subscribe to the channel. It really does help. And if you're listening on any of the audio platforms, then a review would be much appreciated. But without going into the usual chat at the beginning, which is normally centered around the weather, I know very British. The weather's all right today. It's not baking hot. It's warm. I'm in a shorts and t-shirt, which is lovely, great, brilliant, but I'm not like sweating, which I also quite like as well. It's a bit cloudy, it's a bit overcast, and I think that's helped with that. For those of you that are wondering how my day at the zoo went yesterday, it was tiring, man. I feel like I was more tired than the kids by the time I came home. But it was a good day out. And thank you for all the suggestions that you've been sending in the comment section on yesterday's show about things I could do over the summer holidays to occupy the kids. For me, it's not really a worry about like where you got to travel to or any sort of fees that you need to pay for these things. I know that, these things don't come for free. Not saying I'm made of money, but I know that these things don't come for free. And if it means the kids have a good holiday, then I'm more than happy to pay for stuff. It's just that the ideas aren't there for me. I'm not very good at that stuff. But anyway, thank you for all your suggestions. Really do appreciate it. Let me say a few hellos to some of you in the live chat that are with us. We've got the Arsenal Avenger in the chat, Junior, Dog Boy, Marcella, NG Pisa joins us from Malaysia. We've got listeners currently tuning from Australia. Nick is with us. Abdi Latif is asking about the Osimhen stuff. We'll come onto that a little bit later on. Aiden says, thank you for the great content and your dedication. You're doing great, Harry. Very appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in as always. Okay, let's dive into our first story of the day then. We're going to talk about Emile Smith Rowe's goodbye. So it was confirmed yesterday that Emile Smith Rowe, otherwise known as the Croydon De Bruyne, is now a Fulham player. And they were showing him off in all his glory yesterday across their social media channels. And why wouldn't they? He spoke at length with the club's own sort of media department. And he said that he'd spoken to Marco Silva in advance, that Marco Silva is a man who's very much to the point, and having interviewed him a few times for BBC Radio London, I can say that is certainly true of Marco Silva, and that he kind of communicated to Emile Smith Rowe very much from the off what he wanted from him, where he thought he could fit in. And that was a big appeal to Emile Smith Rowe, who thanked everybody at Arsenal for the career he's had to date, for bringing him up, for getting him into this position. and had nothing but positive things to say. Now, we know that injuries have been the primary reason for him not playing a big part over the last 2 to 3 seasons. But it would have been easy for Emile Smith Rowe, who's obviously spent a long, long time at the football club, to maybe feel a little bit bitter about the fact that even when available, he's not had an awful lot of game time, and that perhaps, when he could have given him opportunities, Mikel Arteta has decided not to. I always say this, though, when the team's performing at a really, really high standard and everything's going well, makes it really difficult, doesn't it, for players that are on the fringes, on the peripheries, to kick up a stink about not playing. Like, the manager only has to point out what's going on the pitch in front of everybody's eyes week in, week out. And that's enough justification for sticking with the players that he's sticking with and trusting the players that he has trusted more than he did Emile Smith Rowe. But Mikel Arteta did speak of his sadness at sort of Emile Smith Rowe's departure. Obviously, a player that he respects, a player that he rates, I think, but a player that, as the team evolved and obviously his injuries meant that he wasn't a part of that evolution, he ended up not quite fitting in. And I don't think that Mikel Arteta set out to marginalize Emile Smith Rowe, or I don't for a second think that the intention was to kind of, freeze him out because of any issues with regards to the talent level or ability level or anything like that. Some have suggested in the past that maybe there was an attitude thing that maybe Mikel Arteta didn't like. I think that was people just trying to make a big deal out of nothing during a period where Emile Smith Rowe had gone from kind of, and I mean this in the most respectful way, but sort of hero to zero at Arsenal, in that he'd gone from being a really, really key part of the team and everything that we did. But then before long, he found himself on the sidelines. He found himself not getting game time. And all of a sudden, we were in a place where people were starting to question whether he was actually that good. And I think at times that was unfair. I do think there are questions to be asked around whether or not, outside of the injuries, Emile Smith Rowe might have found himself sort of on the sidelines a bit more than maybe people expected going back 3-4 years ago. I think for me, as I always talk about it, the evolution of the team, and I always think that, yes, Mikel Arteta had an idea in his mind of how he wanted his team to look, set up and play from the beginning. But I do think that idea has evolved. And I think you can see that based on the fact that every single summer he goes and brings in players and makes tweaks that set us up in a slightly different way. Because I think more than a lot of things, Mikel Arteta values the fact that you need to be adaptable. And he appreciates that, to keep moving, to keep progressing, and to keep up with Manchester City, who he would have seen firsthand constantly make tweaks and adjustments themselves. You go back 2 years and, they played with a false nine and everybody was talking about their fluency in attack. You fast forward to today and they've got the best target man or the best focal point striker maybe in world football in Erling Haaland. So they've adapted, they've changed. He would have watched Pep Guardiola firsthand, constantly changing things. And Arteta's done that. And I think he's stumbled on some things. I think he's learned some things along the road as a manager. And so, yes, you can say that he doesn't rate Emile Smith Rowe, and that's ultimately why we've let him go. But I do think that it's partly because of just the natural progression of things. Arsenal looked very different, are set up very different. I've said it before. When he first came into the side, he was playing on that left and coming in field and causing teams problems. And as time went on, Mikel Arteta wanted something different on that left-hand side. Martinelli is something very, very different. He became the starter. Okay, didn't have a great season last year, and Trossard took over towards the end of the campaign in terms of starting. But, there was no longer a place for an Emile Smith Rowe type player. I mean, he's not going to get the Martin Odegaard role because of how good Martin Odegaard is. He is the linchpin of this team, someone that Arteta very much trusts for a number of reasons. A, because he's super talented. B, because he's just incredibly hardworking. C, because he's intelligent enough to make sure that the manager's instructions are being carried onto the pitch. He's almost Mikel Arteta's tactical voice out there. And there was just no longer a place for Emile Smith Rowe. It's sad to see him go. It is really sad. And, I'd obviously come to terms with it a while ago because we knew that this Fulham deal was on the cards. But when we got that announcement yesterday, you did kind of get that kind of sinking feeling, didn't you? You did feel it right in the heart when Fulham announced him. But genuinely wish Emile Smith Rowe all the best. In terms of what we got for him then, so Arsenal have received £27 million guaranteed, or will receive. Not sure how exactly that payment is going to be made up, what the structure looks like, but it's a guaranteed £27 million with £7 million worth of add-ons, which are considered realistic. Plus, there is a sell-on clause that Arsenal have included in that, which is worth more than 10%, although it's not specified exactly how much that is. I would say pretty good business from Arsenal, given all of the things that we've just been discussing. Okay, we're going to turn our attentions to Eddie Nketiah's future now. Now, we talked on yesterday's show, on Friday's show, about the fact that there was lots of conflicting information flying around about this. Some were saying that the deal was imminent. Some were saying that it was literally a case of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Others were saying that Marseille were well off of Arsenal's valuation. Others were saying that there was a €27 million proposal that was put on the table yesterday, and we hadn't heard whether or not that had been rejected or accepted, and we were kind of a little bit unsure as to where we were exactly on that. This is the latest update from Fabrizio Romano, and I know things can change so quickly. So if you're watching this a little bit later on and the information's changed, do bear with me. But this is an update that he put out less than an hour ago now on X. He said he understands that Arsenal want at least €35 million plus a sell-on clause for Eddie Nketiah. That's why Arsenal decided to reject the €27 million proposal from Olympique Marseille, as revealed on Friday. There's no agreement between the two clubs so far, and Olympique Marseille could now start to look also at new options. Right, so let's just do this quick currency conversion. So €35 million is 29.8 million British pounds. So Arsenal looking to get as close to that £30 million mark as possible. Okay. Marseille's offer, which was €27 million, is only at around about £23 million. So from what I can understand, from what I can see in terms of pounds, there's about a £7 million difference between where Marseille are at and where Arsenal need them to be. Now, I'd be a little bit worried now if I was Arsenal, because as we discussed yesterday, it doesn't feel like there's a queue of clubs sort of waiting to sign Eddie Nketiah, at least not at the price point that Arsenal are hoping to sell him for. So this is a problem. And Marseille know this. Marseille know that, as far as at least we're aware, or at least they might be aware, there isn't any serious competition for Eddie Nketiah. They'll know that Arsenal prefer to do a deal between now and the end of the window. And that's why they're able to go in with lower offers. And this is what, the second one, possibly the third. I think it's the second official offer on the table, though. And so, what do Arsenal do from here? Like, do you risk scuppering an entire deal for the sake of £7 million? Because Eddie Nketiah's wages are a thing as well. We've talked about this before. You're talking about a player on 100k a week. So you wouldn't just be getting the money in the door, you'd be saving the money as well that you're paying out on his wages. That's why it makes sense for Arsenal to move him on, given how little game time he had in the second half of last season and how much he's expected to get, particularly if Arsenal still have hopes, as was reported yesterday, of bringing in another forward. I said this right at the beginning of sort of Eddie Nketiah's latest contract, the contract that he's currently on. We looked at it and it was £100,000 a week, right? Which came to 5.2 million a year. And if you times that by 5, 26 million is what Arsenal would have forked out on Eddie Nketiah's contract. But if you divide that 26 million figure back by 5 and then times that by 2, selling him 2 years out of his 5-year contract, or maybe even 3 years out of that 5-year contract expiring, you're saving yourself over 10 million euros. So actually, or 10 million quid, what you've actually paid towards Eddie Nketiah is significantly less than that 25 million price point I've made. So if you got the 23 million, you'd still be making profit. Obviously, in Arsenal's eyes, I know that sounds a bit confusing, but what I was looking at, just to explain and be clear, is how much that 5-year contract was going to cost Arsenal over that period of time, because they signed him up partly because they wanted to keep him, but partly because I think they saw that as a better option than going and spending well in excess of that for another striking option that probably was going to play second fiddle. So Arsenal selling him midway sort of through that 5-year contract extension, it does put them in a place where they're going to make profit regardless. They would have to be really badly lowballed to not make profit on Eddie Nketiah. He's homegrown, so that money goes directly to their profit and loss accounts as pure profit, as we've heard in the news lots at the moment with Chelsea. I just feel like to ask for £30 million from a Ligue 1 club is a little bit unrealistic. And I would imagine that if Marseille could push their offer up a little bit further, Arsenal would entertain that. And if there's a kind of halfway house at which the two clubs could meet, I think a deal could be done. Because Eddie Nketiah wants to move. Arsenal do want to move him on. Otherwise, they wouldn't be entertaining these conversations in the first place. They have a price point, and I get that for years we've said Arsenal are really, really bad at negotiations. And if they were to crumble really early on in this, it wouldn't send the right message. And actually what they're trying to do is rebuild their reputation in that way. But I just think, as we've been discussing quite a bit, when you sell abroad, you have to accept that you're dealing in a different market. The counter argument to that would be, well, if we were selling to a Premier League club, Arsenal would be looking for £50 million for Eddie Nketiah. We don't know if that's true, and we don't know if that's realistic because, as we've mentioned, there aren't any Premier League clubs in the mix. I'm surprised there aren't any Premier League clubs in the mix. I really, really am. Marseille are the front runners here. Marseille is a club that Eddie is very, very keen on joining, from what we understand. And as I've said before, I think it'd be a great place for him to land. But there's still work to be done on this. The fact that Marseille are going to now consider new options says that we're in a really crucial and critical stage of these negotiations, because they could miss out on their primary target, but also Arsenal could miss out on a healthy sale for a player that they clearly want to move on this time around. So, we'll see. We'll see how this goes. But no breakthrough in negotiations. If anything, the deal is in danger of completely falling apart because, as we say, Arsenal are maybe asking for slightly too much, in my opinion, given the circumstances, accounting for the fact that we're selling to a Ligue 1 club and the player really wants to go there and all the rest of that. Arsenal could miss out on a sale altogether for Eddie Nketiah, which I think would be a disaster at this stage for the Gunners. I really do think we could do with the money. And I know that, there's been a lot of chat over the last 24, 48 hours about Arsenal moving to sign Mikel Merino, who we're not going to talk about, incidentally, on today's show for once, and wanting to potentially do further business in the attacking department after that. This could be crucial to that. And it will be much easier to bridge the gap of the £6-7 million that Marseille's offer falls short of than it would be to just have to fork out entirely for a new attacker. So this deal is critical and it's important to both of these teams. If Marseille start looking elsewhere, is it as critical to them? No. Therefore, are they going to push harder? Maybe not. And maybe you've priced yourself out of a deal altogether. So I'm going to be watching this one very, very closely over the next few days. I really, really am. Okay, going to take a short pause. When we come back, we're going to discuss the Victor Osimhen stuff, which is interesting to say the least. We'll get into that right after this short pause. Don't go anywhere. You are listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
You heard the kid. Like and subscribe to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. There's a load of you watching us right now on YouTube, which is amazing to see. There's plenty of you with us on X as well. If you're on X, come over to the YouTube channel, give it a subscribe. That way you'll always be in touch with everything that we're doing. If you prefer to listen on the go, on the move, and prefer to take your podcasts in via audio format, then subscribe on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and all the other places. There's over 400 of you with me live right now on YouTube, but we've only got 84 likes on the board. There's no reason why we can't target 500 likes on today's video / podcast. So if you could hit the like button while you're here, that would be really, really helpful. If we got to 300-ish by the time the live stream ends, I'd be pretty confident of hitting that target of 500. So please like, subscribe. You know the drill by now. Okay, then. You know what? Before I dive into the Osimhen stuff, and I know I'm teasing you a little bit here, let's just quickly touch on this comment from Hot Hits, who's a City fan, who says, as a City fan, I can't believe I monitor Arsenal's transfers. Never saw you guys ever getting close to us. That says a lot, doesn't it? That says a lot about sort of the progress that Arsenal have made in recent years. And it's difficult to see, I guess, when you're a fan of a club like Manchester City, who had Mikel Arteta there. It's difficult from the outside looking in, I think, to always recognize the impact that a number 2 can have. And you could argue that they can't possibly have the same impact as they can as a number 1 when they've got autonomy and control. And Mikel Arteta has plenty of that at Arsenal, and he has taken them forward so much. And it's great to hear that from a City fan. Look, I've spoken in the past about the City situation with the 115 outstanding charges. I couldn't possibly tell you that I know they are guilty or that I know they are innocent. The truth is, I don't know. And I'm a big believer in innocent until proven guilty. But, you know, as much as I think the whole cloud of this hanging over them and the league is a real big problem and needs to be addressed, I do have a lot of respect for the job that Pep Guardiola has done. The football that they play is just beautiful and it's exemplary. And it's why so many of the modern day managers base their philosophies around Pep Guardiola. There may be tweaks and you don't always have the quality of player to carry it out and replicate it to a T. But, you know, Pep Guardiola will go down as, if not the greatest of all time, one of the greatest of all time. And for all the talk about how City have got there, you have to say that they're an incredibly well-run club, because there are clubs like Manchester United, like Chelsea, that have spent mega money too, but not got anywhere near them in terms of achievements on the pitch and level. So, yeah, credit to them. Anyway, that's enough credit to Manchester City. Let's get on to the Victor Osimhen story. Okay, so yesterday, reports emerged from Italy, and the source was a gentleman who goes by the name of Ilario Di Giovanni. I don't know what his full name is. Basically, I'm going by his X account. But he talked on Italian radio about Arsenal's interest in Victor Osimhen, and that the club, and I quote, because I would never phrase a sentence this way, Arsenal are moving heavily in the last hours for Victor Osimhen. Arsenal moving heavily. Does that mean that Arsenal are being aggressive? Arsenal are really trying to make this happen. Arsenal are desperate to get Victor Osimhen in the door. He's a striker that we've been linked with for a number of years. And if you'd have asked me 2 years ago whether I'd have taken Victor Osimhen, pretty much at any price, I'd have said, go and do it. This could be the signing that takes Arsenal to the next level. This could be the signing that takes Arsenal onto another stratosphere and allows them to finally compete with Manchester City. However, over the last 2 years, we have competed with Manchester City and we've done it without Victor Osimhen. And during all of that time, I think it's fair to say that Victor Osimhen's stock has declined. Since Napoli won the Scudetto, he, in my opinion, has declined a little bit. And I think that that's partly due to Napoli declining as well. And, I've always had doubts and concerns about Victor Osimhen in terms of build-up play, link-up play, all of that stuff. I think he formed a really good, strong partnership with Kvaratskhelia at Napoli, and those two linked up really, really well at times. But in Victor Osimhen, you'd be bringing something in that's completely different to what we've built our system around and what works at this moment in time. So can he hold the ball up? I'm not sure. What is his strength? I think, he's a great runner in behind and he's a poacher inside the penalty box. In terms of running in behind, we do it and we love to do it when we get the opportunity, but we often face low blocks. And so that particular strength is not always, sort of brought to the fore. So I worry about that a little bit. I think the injuries have been a thing for Victor Osimhen in recent years. I'm not talking about major injuries that will, have you sort of being kept up at night and stressing about. Like, you don't expect when Victor Osimhen picks up a problem that he's going to be out for months in the way that maybe you feel when you hear Thomas Partey's got a problem, as an example. But yeah, it's first of all, you got to think about where this is coming from. And I don't think the source is, at least to my knowledge, particularly reliable. Secondly, you got to think about how he fits into the team. I think he's a great striker in his own right, but I don't know that he's the striker for Arsenal. I think about what Napoli have been demanding for him, and the line has been throughout the summer that they want over 100 million euros for him. There has been some suggestions in the media recently that because of Napoli's desire to get Romelu Lukaku in for Antonio Conte, and that means almost, they need to kind of make sure that Osimhen goes so that they can facilitate that. There's been suggestions that they take a much lower price, in which case I'd be interested. But there's so much that's unclear with this. It's such a vague report. And so when I talk about these reports, the first thing I always do is, in my own head, try and process whether or not it makes sense. And I don't think it does make sense, because I think if Arsenal were going to spend that kind of money on anybody, I think there's 3 or 4 players on a list that I think would be ahead of Victor Osimhen. What Arsenal have also shown us in recent years is that they won't just sign players for the sake of it. They might make squad signings, and signings that raise the floor of the squad rather than pushing the ceiling higher. But those signings will be players in the profile of Jorginho, of Leandro Trossard, of maybe, you could argue, Mikel Merino, if that one gets done. Players that are in the kind of medium bracket in terms of cost. Victor Osimhen is going to be in the top bracket realistically, and I don't think that Arsenal would be willing to go and spend what Napoli would want. Also, I think PSG is probably still the most likely destination for him. We understand that there's a contract offer on the table for Victor Osimhen that is huge from PSG. And again, I don't think Arsenal would be willing to break the bank for Victor Osimhen at this stage. 2 years ago, maybe, had he become available then, maybe. We opted to bring in Gabriel Jesus. We since brought in Kai Havertz. And I just don't think that this is something that is going to happen. So, I need it from a much more reliable source before I'll start to believe it and start to kind of, talk about it with any real, I guess, I don't know what the right word is. Like, I'll talk about it and sort of advocate for the information, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not at that stage. I can't do that with this source. But also, I just don't think it makes sense. And a lot of the time, if something doesn't make sense, it probably isn't going to happen. That's the way I approach sort of transfer rumors first and foremost. And then we try and get into the kind of nitty gritty of it and we try and figure it out. He's a great finisher in front of goal. He's a goal scorer. He's a top striker. And wherever he goes, he's going to score goals. But given the noises that have been coming out of Arsenal, the suggestion from Mikel Arteta the other day, and I know people say that he won't say it publicly, and I know he never would, but he didn't need to say that we can't do or that we won't do a Declan Rice type deal in terms of the finance involved. But the fact that he did makes me even less inclined to believe that Arsenal are pushing to sign Victor Osimhen. So we'll see. Not as big on him as I was, as I say, 2 years ago. Still not against the signing, but the price has to be right. And knowing that you're dealing with Napoli and Aurelio De Laurentiis, I don't know that you're going to get a price that I would say is reasonable for Victor Osimhen. So yeah, let's see. People have been talking about Gyökeres. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that is more likely than this one. So that kind of puts into context where I'm at with the Victor Osimhen chat. Is it going to happen? I don't think so. Is he suited to Arsenal? I'm not entirely sure. It would involve changing the way we play again. And I think you will see a tweak, because there always is from Mikel Arteta. But whether that's going to be in the way we deploy a striker, I just don't know. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Let's take some of you guys' thoughts and comments from on this. From the live chat. So, lots of you saying that Youssoufa Moukoko has decided to join Marseille. Who has that come from? Let's have a look, because would that impact on Marseille's ability or want to get Eddie Nketiah in the door? Is that something that we got to look out for? Hold on a second. Youssoufa Moukoko has decided to join Marseille on exclusive from Fabrizio Romano 26 minutes ago. Youssoufa Moukoko has decided to join Olympique Marseille. Despite bids from more than 5 clubs around Europe, Moukoko wants the Marseille project. Personal terms are agreed. Negotiations are underway between Marseille and Borussia Dortmund on a loan deal with a buy option clause. So they wouldn't be committing funds to a permanent deal. So I don't know that that does impact, but we of course can wait and see on that. Tom says, isn't there a risk of Osimhen only being successful in Italy for the same reason Lukaku was? Superior athleticism compared to the defenses. The Premier League plays at a higher level. 60 million would be good, though. Look, at 60 million, I'd be interested, but I just don't believe for a second that that's what Napoli would accept. Unless they got really desperate at the end of the window and Conte was really pushing for the Lukaku thing, and that was still stuck because Napoli don't have the funds, and they figured that getting rid of Osimhen in a kind of flash sale would allow them to do that. If that was possible, if 60 million got it done, then I'd be for it. But I'm reluctant to go much bigger than that on someone like Victor Osimhen, just for all of the reasons, I guess, that I've been discussing. And on the point about superior athleticism shining through in Serie A, I think that's a valid point. I've said that for years. I've said for years and years and years that I think that when you're at a good level physically, obviously that helps wherever you play. But when you're at a good level physically in Italy, where the physical level generally is lower than what it is in the Premier League, then that makes you a standout player. And if you turn up in a league where the physical level is much higher, the pace of the game is higher, then the advantages, or some of the advantages that you had in Italy, become null and void in the Premier League. And then it's about other things. And you got to think about what else they have in their armory that would make them standout players in the Premier League. And in Victor Osimhen's case, I think there are a few things. I think there are more things than I would argue for Romelu Lukaku. But I see why you're making that comparison, and it is an interesting point. Guys, quick reminder, there's over 500 of you on YouTube alone now. So please, let's get that like target of 500 likes. Please do smash the like button if you haven't done so already. It really, really does help. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. And if you're listening on audio, leave us a review. Paul James says, I'd prefer to push the boat out and try and sign Gyökeres over Osimhen. Jenki says, a clinical striker allows our wingers to concentrate on getting down the line and putting quality crosses or passes to that gunman in the box. This will ease the pressure on those young shoulders. I think that's a valid point, okay, because there is a pressure on Saka and Martinelli and Trossard and Odegaard and Rice and everyone to contribute goals, probably because we don't have that striker that is, super clinical. But I would argue that's one of the beautiful things about this team as well. And I would argue the fact that we're able to share that burden makes us more unpredictable, makes us more difficult to defend against. And I do wonder if bringing in a striker like Victor Osimhen, who isn't going to drop deep like Havertz does or Jesus does, who isn't going to drift left or right, isn't going to come short and then spin off to make a run in behind, is going to be very much an out-and-out striker. I just wonder if that changes our game too much. And if you start to then rely on that player for goals, and then that player's going through a bad patch, I think that's problematic. I kind of like the way that if Martinelli's not playing great, we can take him out of the team and we can bring in Leandro Trossard, and it's fine. If the left winger doesn't have a great game, Bukayo Saka will on the right, or vice versa. I like the fact that we have that variety to our game. And for me to be openly advocating for us to bring in that type of striker, I need to be convinced of that striker. And I'm not saying I would never advocate for us bringing in an elite forward, but I'd have to be totally sold on that forward for me to say, hands down, this is the way to go. For me, in my mind, I'm just not totally convinced by Victor Osimhen anymore. And I wonder if he's coming in and then the fact that we'd focus so much of our game through him would actually be a disadvantage to us rather than an advantage. I'm just worried. Jid says, let's say we get a target man. How do you think that would affect our style of play? Similar question. Would the upheaving of the way players like Saka, Martinelli, and Odegaard play and approach games be worth the risk? Yeah, and that's my point exactly in a nutshell. I'm not going to repeat what I just said, but you've hit the nail on the head, in my opinion. Steve Hester says, we have been linked today to Joao Pedro from Brighton. Again, one that I'm not totally convinced about. Like, he's obviously someone that impressed last season. A lot of his goals come from the spot, which I think you have to factor in when you're assessing his performances. But that would be one that we'd be doing based on potential, right? And the trajectory that he appears to be on. My issue with that is it's Brighton. And Brighton, traditionally, sell for really, really high prices. And so I'd be worried about that. I'd probably hold fire on Joao Pedro. I suspect that Brighton might not have such a good season next season. And if they don't, then I think that you can potentially pick him off at a much lesser price, particularly if the player wants to go at that stage. I'll tell you who I do like and who I would put ahead of Joao Pedro, at least in my estimations. I would go with someone, or I'd move for someone like Rodrigo Muniz at Fulham. Now, I know that'd be a really difficult deal to do, and I know they demand, but I was really impressed with him on the 5 or 6 occasions I watched him live last season. Obviously followed his campaign outside of that too, but I just thought he was really, really good. And if you're talking about dropping down, I would argue, into the Joao Pedro category, then he would be someone I'd look at first. But that's just my view. Okay, I think we're going to leave it there. I'll just pick up this one actually from Wamadoda, who says, your comparison of Serie A and the English Premier League is skewed because you don't factor in how well Conte did at Chelsea, then did well at Inter, but not so well at Spurs. Besides, Calafiori is from Serie A, isn't he? Yeah, I'll break this down in a few points. Nobody admires Antonio Conte as a manager more than I do. It broke my heart when he joined Spurs. I remember writing a piece on 90min.com a little while ago where I said that I don't think there's a manager in world football that can turn teams around as quickly as him. Now, the longevity thing is an issue and has been in his last couple of jobs, and he's so combustible that you always feel like, he's an argument away from it all sort of blowing up, and that's a worry and a concern when you hire him. But in terms of turning teams around quickly and getting them up to speed with a new way, he's as good as anyone. Did great at Inter, did not so well at Spurs, as you point out, in the end, although the first season getting him into the Champions League was a really remarkable achievement. Calafiori is from Serie A, correct. But the point is, I'm not looking at Calafiori and saying the standout thing when I sort of assess his skills is the fact that he's big, powerful, and strong. That's great. But I'm looking at what he brings you on the ball. I'm looking at his character. I'm looking at his intelligence levels. I'm looking at his footballing IQ. And I'm looking at, the technical side of things more than the physical side of things. The physical side is great and it helps. But I'm saying if you only sign a player, or you sign a player predominantly based on the physical aspects, which would be the case with Romelu Lukaku, who we discussed as an example, which I think has helped Victor Osimhen to stand out above others. If you're signing players based predominantly on that, and then you bring them to the Premier League, that advantage is all of a sudden it doesn't disappear and it doesn't become completely invalid, but that advantage is no longer as significant. And therefore, does that player then still stand out from the crowd? That's the thing you got to think about. But just before I go, in conclusion on this Victor Osimhen stuff, I don't think the source is reliable. When I put it through the kind of logic test in my own mind, it doesn't feel like this makes sense. And I'd be very, very surprised. And I'm not claiming to be in the know, but I'd be very, very surprised if Arsenal ended up dropping a ton of money on Victor Osimhen between now and the window closing. Do I want him to go and get a striker or a forward at least? Yes, I do. Do I want them to spend money, the most amount of money possible to get the best option they can? Yes. But am I convinced today that Victor Osimhen is the best option? No, I'm not. And that's my issue with this. Big thank you to everyone for joining. As always, really appreciate it. Great to see so many of you with us in the live chat, guys. Smash the like button on YouTube if you haven't done so already. We've set a likes target, 500 likes on the video. So please help me achieve that. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're listening on audio, leave us a review. We will be back tomorrow with another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, unless something major breaks between now and then. Then we might see you again. I'll catch you all on the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves. Have a great day. Goodbye.